In the pre-dawn chill of February 14th, 2077, in the stark, windswept mesas of the American Southwest, a formidable figure rested in his high-tech command tent. Commander Thorne, a decorated operative with the Global Intervention Force, GIF, was a man forged in 1,000 virtual and real-world conflicts. He'd served alongside the legendary General Sterling, witnessed the fall of rogue AI cities, and crushed cybernetic armies that had seemed invincible. Fear was an obsolete emotion in his lexicon. Yet, on that night, as the desert wind howled through the canyons, something shifted. The air crackled with an uncanny sentience, a disquieting presence. Thorne woke with the primal certainty that he was not alone, and he was right. A figure, cloaked in shadow and utterly silent, moved within the tent. No alarms blared. His elite, cyber-enhanced guards remained stoic at their posts. Everything appeared normal, yet utterly wrong. In that moment, Thorne grasped a truth no battlefield had ever revealed. True power wasn't measured by the number of drones in your arsenal, but by the ability to achieve the impossible. The miniaturized kinetic blade was swift, silent, and precise. By the time the Dawn Patrol discovered his body, the assassin had vanished like a digital ghost. No trace, no witnesses, only a single, deliberate mark left beside the corpse. The stylized owl insignia of the Cygnus Syndicate. This was no ordinary military act. It was a message. The GIF had conquered half the globe through sheer kinetic might, ruthless, algorithmic discipline, and strategic cyber warfare. They'd crushed drone fleets in open engagement, leveled cities that dared resist their digital dominion. No one could stop them. But now, they faced something entirely different. An enemy that didn't engage in open warfare. An enemy without visible armies. An enemy capable of penetrating the deepest layers of their digital fortress and disappearing without a trace. The GIF were masters of the visible war, the tangible battlefield, while the Cygnus Syndicate had perfected the art of the unseen. And when these two titans clashed, the world would tremble in a way no conventional battle ever could. Welcome to the story of one of the most unusual and terrifying conflicts of the 21st century. A war waged not on sprawling battlefields, but in the shadows, in the dark corners of the digital realm, during the moments of vulnerability of the most powerful individuals on Earth. This is the story of how the clandestine Cygnus Syndicate became the only force capable of shaking the foundations of the Global Intervention Force. If you're fascinated by conflicts that reshape the world, subscribe and hit the notification bell, because what you're about to learn transcends any history databank. The question isn't, who won this war? The question is, can brute force overcome unseen terror? Stay until the end, because the answer will surprise you. To understand this incredible war, we must first dissect who these two forces truly were, and why their confrontation was inevitable. We are in the early 21st century. The world, as the old guard knew it, is being rewritten in data streams and quantum encryption, and at the heart of this transformation stands the Global Intervention Force, the most devastating military machine humanity had ever witnessed. The GIF wasn't just a collection of armies. They were a perfectly optimized warfighting organism. Imagine autonomous drone swarms, capable of covering 500 miles in a day, recharging on the fly, operating in dormant modes, and awakening ready for engagement. Operatives trained in neural interface combat from their adolescence. An army that could coordinate movements across vast distances using quantum-entangled signals with a precision that rivaled the most advanced predictive algorithms. Under the leadership of General Sterling and his successors, the GIF had forged the largest contiguous digital empire in history. From the Silicon Valleys of California to the digital gateways of Europe, from the Arctic servers of Siberia to the data fortresses of India, entire corporate states vanished within weeks. Ancient dynasties of influence crumbled like corrupted code. And most terrifyingly, the GIF used terror as a strategic weapon. If a city surrendered its digital sovereignty, it could expect leniency. But if it resisted, the destruction was absolute. The GIF would purge entire populations, leaving digital pyramids of deleted data as warnings for the next target. This wasn't senseless destruction. It was perfectly calculated psychological warfare. After the initial mass purges, cities would surrender without a fight. Terror did the work that thousands of soldiers couldn't. But while the GIF ravaged Asia with their shock and awe tactics, in the mesas of the American Southwest, something entirely different was brewing. Something that watched, that waited, honing its own unique weapon. The Cygnus Syndicate. Their true designation was the Whispers, and their story began nearly 2 centuries earlier, in 2042, when a figure named Alias Thorn, no relation to Commander Thorn, but a shared name that would become a grim irony, seized the remote stronghold of the Nest, not with an army, not with a siege, but with intellect and persuasion. Thorn simply convinced the inhabitants that joining his cause was the optimal outcome. This was the first demonstration of what would become their core philosophy. The power of influence far surpassed the power of the blade, or in this case, the kill code. From the Nest, a seemingly impenetrable fortress nestled in the rugged mountains south of the Mojave, Thorn built something revolutionary. Not a nation, but an unusual army. A sprawling network of operatives skilled in the deadliest art, political assassination, and digital disruption. The Whispers developed a system that would take historians centuries to fully comprehend. They recruited young individuals, primarily from loyal families or orphans with no external ties. For years, they were trained not only in combat and stealth, but also in languages, cultures, digital forensics, and the nuances of corporate espionage. A Whisper operative could infiltrate an enemy's network for months, even years, gain trust, become indispensable, and when the precise moment arrived, when a directive came from the Nest, that trusted advisor, that indispensable code architect, that closest confidant would become an instrument of death. But there was something else, something that made them truly unique in the history of warfare. The Whispers didn't just kill, they instilled dread. They left messages, sometimes warning their targets before striking. They'd slip encrypted data packets under the digital pillows of CEOs while they slept, a promise of what was to come. In other instances, they'd publicly expose someone in broad daylight, surrounded by their security, proving that no one was truly safe. And here lies the crucial detail. A direct kinetic kill requires proximity, requires looking into the victim's eyes. It's personal. It's terrifying, and sends a far more potent message. We were close enough to touch you. It could have been anyone, your trusted security chief, your loyal intern, your friend. They assassinated tech moguls, corrupt politicians, rogue AI architects, anyone who threatened their independence or their vision of the world. They established a network of hidden strongholds across the American hinterlands and in encrypted digital enclaves. Each was defended not so much by firewalls, but by its reputation, because who would dare attack the Whispers, knowing that vengeance could arrive years later, at the most unexpected moment, from the hand of someone you trusted implicitly. The corporate titans feared them, governments engaged in covert negotiations with them, data brokers paid them tribute, not because the syndicate commanded vast armies, but because they possessed something far more valuable, the ability to alter the course of history by eliminating the right person at the right moment. Now, imagine what happens when two diametrically opposed philosophies of power are destined to collide. On one side, the GIF, open, direct conquerors who believed in the power of sheer numbers and overwhelming superiority. On the other, the Whispers, shadowy operators who believed in the power of precision and psychological terror. The GIF advanced westward, crushing all in their path. The digital and physical territories of the American Southwest, where the Whispers had operated freely for nearly 2 centuries, lay directly in their path. The clash was inevitable, but here lay the great question that plagued strategists on both sides. How do you conquer an enemy that doesn't fight conventional battles? How do you dismantle fortresses defended not by soldiers, but by fear? And on the other side, how do you assassinate a leader whose operational reach is so vast, you never know where it will strike next? How do you sow terror among warriors raised to know no fear? This was not a war of armies clashing on open servers. This was something far darker, more personal, more psychological. This was a war where every shadow could conceal a death, where every ally could be a traitor, where paranoia became a weapon as deadly as any neural disruptor. And most astonishingly, both sides knew precisely who their enemy was, yet neither truly knew how to defeat them. To understand how the Whispers became the most formidable force in the digital underworld, we must rewind to 2042 and meet the man who made it happen, Alias Thorn. Born in the sprawling tech hub of Silicon Valley, Thorn grew up in an era of digital and political chaos. The fragmented world of corporate states and fractured ideologies was ripe for change. Thorne became enamored with a radical offshoot of digital libertarianism, one that emphasized clandestine knowledge and esoteric interpretations of digital scripture. In a world of sprawling tech empires and omnipresent surveillance, true power belonged not to those with the most data, but to those who controlled the decisions of those who commanded that data. For years, Thorne traveled, learned, and built a network of loyal followers. And when he was finally ready to act, he didn't conquer the nest with violence. He took it with words. The nest, a remote, heavily fortified data haven built on a mountainous mesa, was considered impregnable. Thorne sent emissaries who spent months converting the inhabitants and the security detail to his cause. When he finally arrived at the gates, the fortress's administrator found he had no allies left. Thorne bought the fortress, and the administrator left peacefully. Not a single byte of data was compromised. It was a lesson Thorne never forgot. The most perfect conquest is one where the enemy willingly relinquishes control. From the nest, Thorne began to realize his vision. Not a traditional empire, but something entirely new. A state within a state. An invisible network of loyalty that transcended borders and infiltrated the digital fortresses of the powerful. The recruitment system for the Whispers was meticulously thorough and ruthlessly efficient. They sought young individuals, typically between the ages of 12 and 16. Their particular attention fell upon orphans or children of loyal families, those who could be molded without distracting external attachments. These youths were sent to the nest, or one of the Syndicate's other strongholds. It was there that the multi-year process of their transformation began. Training wasn't limited to physical conditioning, though that was paramount. Aspiring operatives mastered the art of kinetic combat, their only true weapon in their arsenal. They were taught to move silently, scale walls, bypass digital locks, and kill instantly and efficiently. But the true mastery of a Whisper operative lay in their ability to infiltrate anywhere. They delved deeply into the customs and traditions of various cultures and digital subcultures, seamlessly posing as data brokers, gig workers, security consultants, digital monks, or anyone else necessary. A Whisper operative could fully adopt a new persona and live it for months, even years, waiting for the opportune moment. However, there was a darker aspect to their training: absolute loyalty. Thorne developed a system of devotion bordering on fanaticism. Recruits were convinced that serving the Syndicate was equivalent to serving a divine digital mandate, and that death in the line of duty guaranteed a place in the digital afterlife. Some historians mention complex ceremonies where Thorne supposedly used experimental neuroenhancers to create mystical experiences. While this remains a subject of debate, the result of such training is undeniable. The Whispers did not fear death. On the contrary, they embraced it as an integral part of their destiny. And here's what's truly chilling. This wasn't blind fanaticism. It was calculated fanaticism, directed with surgical precision at specific targets. The first major political assassination orchestrated by Thorne occurred in 2065. The target was Director Anya Sharma, the most influential cybersecurity chief of the Global Intervention Force, a key figure in the world of digital security. Sharma had been relentlessly pursuing the Whispers and embodied everything Thorne despised: established power, rigid orthodoxy. An operative, disguised as a street artist performing a holographic display, approached Sharma during a public event. In a moment of distraction, the operative struck. The kinetic blade found its mark. Director Sharma, the woman who effectively ran the GIF's digital defenses, fell to the digital pavement. The message was unequivocal. No one was safe. No power, no wealth, no firewalls could protect you if the Syndicate decided you must die. But Thorne didn't stop there. Just weeks later, another operative assassinated General Marcus Vance, a rising star in the GIF. The Global Intervention Force was plunged into a spiral of internal purges and cascading cybersecurity breaches that lasted for years. And Thorne achieved all of this without deploying a single drone, without conquering a single physical location beyond the nest. This was the true genius of the Syndicate strategy. They didn't need to control territories when they could influence the fates of those who ruled them. Over the following decades, the Syndicate expanded its network. The Whispers seized or constructed new hidden bases in remote regions and encrypted digital domains. Each base functioned as an independent, yet interconnected node, capable of acting autonomously, but adhering to a single, central directive from the nest. It was a revolutionary organizational structure, a century ahead of its time, a decentralized yet coordinated network that was impossible to fully dismantle because it didn't depend on a single point of control. The Whispers earned a reputation far exceeding their actual numbers. Likely, at their peak, they numbered no more than a few thousand active operatives, but their influence was disproportionately vast. This was due to their method of calculated terror. They didn't always kill. Sometimes, a warning was enough. There are documented cases where a CEO or a senator would wake up to find an encrypted drive planted under their pillow with a message. You could have been this drive. The message was clear. We were here. We were close enough. Next time, it wouldn't just be a warning. This form of psychological intimidation was devastating. Leaders lived in constant fear. That trusted intern who had served for years, that loyal security guard, that indispensable advisor, anyone could be a Whisper operative. Paranoia became a more effective prison than any physical incarceration. European cyber mercenaries, venturing into contested digital territories during the data wars, were particularly unnerved by the Syndicate. They were accustomed to battling rogue AI armies in open cyber combat, but this was something entirely different. Lord Conrad, a prominent tech mogul, was assassinated by two Whispers disguised as his own IT staff. Richard Lionheart Sterling, the formidable GIF commander, received warnings from the Syndicate and, according to encrypted logs, chose to negotiate rather than test their wrath. The Syndicate also developed a peculiar code of ethics. They didn't take assassination contracts for mere currency. They acted only when it aligned with their strategic or philosophical interests. This earned them a reputation for incorruptibility, which paradoxically increased their power. The Whispers couldn't be bought. One could only hope not to become their next target. But while the assassins honed their craft in hidden enclaves, in the east, amidst the sprawling digital plains, another power was coalescing, a power that knew no shadows, recognized no subtlety, and solved every problem with the same brutal efficiency. The Global Intervention Force, relentlessly crushing all in its path, and when these two philosophies finally collided, the world would discover something astonishing. Visible terror and invisible dread created a far more explosive combination than any conventional battle, for the assassins had spent nearly 2 centuries building their reputation for inevitable death. But until now, they had never faced an enemy that simply didn't value death. To grasp the enormity of the GIF's confrontation with the assassins, we must first understand what set the GIF apart from all other military forces in history. The GIF wasn't born conquerors, they were born survivors. The unforgiving digital and physical landscapes of the early 21st century were one of the most hostile environments on the planet. Extreme weather events, resource scarcity, and constant digital warfare. The only way to survive was through constant adaptation and ruthless efficiency. There were no cities in the traditional sense, no settled agriculture, only nomadic tribes fighting for scarce resources across vast territories, and nascent tech conglomerates vying for digital dominance. In this harsh environment, the GIF developed skills that, when applied to warfare, made them nearly invincible. Every GIF recruit learned to operate advanced drone systems before they could confidently pilot a drone. By age 3, they were in drone simulators. By age 5, they were firing kinetic rounds from advanced drones. By 10, they could operate autonomous units for days without rest. It wasn't a choice. It was a condition for survival. A GIF operative who couldn't adapt was a dead operative, but the true genius of the GIF wasn't just in individual skills. It was in how those skills were transformed into a finely tuned war machine. When General Sterling unified the fragmented military and corporate security forces in the early 2050s, he didn't just create an empire. He created the most effective fighting force the world had ever seen. And he achieved this by breaking all conventional rules of warfare. First, he completely reorganized the military structure, discarding familiar corporate hierarchies and implementing a system based on decimal units. Squads of 10, platoons of 100, companies of 1,000, battalions of 10,000. Each unit had a responsible commander. If one person from your squad of 10 went rogue, the other 9 were held accountable. This unthinkable discipline forged an unbreakable loyalty, not for honor or ideology, but for mutual survival. Second, he implemented principles of radical meritocracy. It didn't matter your corporate lineage, your digital pedigree, or your wealth. If you were competent, you rose. If you failed, you were replaced or purged. This system allowed the best strategists and warriors to rise to power, a revolutionary concept in an era where privilege often dictated advancement. Third, they developed communication and coordination tactics that were centuries ahead of their time. They utilized quantum-entangled signals, holographic projections, and drone courier systems capable of transmitting orders across hundreds of miles within minutes. The GIF army could diverge into multiple columns, seemingly disparate and vulnerable, then converge at designated points with perfect synchronization. But the true secret weapon of the GIF was something far darker: systematic terror. The GIF learned that killing every soldier in an enemy army was inefficient. Killing the right people in the right way at the right moment was far more effective. Upon taking a city that resisted, they would purge entire populations not out of senseless brutality, but as a calculated measure of deterrence. Word spread. The next city in their path would surrender without a fight. Having heard what happened to those who resisted, they erected digital pyramids of deleted data not as military trophies, but as a form of warning. Each pyramid seemed to say, "This is what awaits you if you dare to defy us." They forced survivors from conquered cities to march ahead in subsequent sieges. Thus, when they attacked a new city, the first targets the defenders had to kill were their own neighbors, their own kin. This was devastating psychological warfare, and most terrifyingly, it worked. The GIF conquered more territory in 50 years than the Roman Empire in 400, and they did it with relatively small armies. At their peak, they likely never had more than 150,000 active warriors at any given time. But these warriors, using terror as a force multiplier, controlled an empire stretching from the Pacific to Eastern Europe. Mobility was their other unparalleled advantage. The average GIF drone commander had 4 or 5 backup drone units. They constantly swapped them out, allowing them to cover up to 100 miles a day when necessary. Their enemies, accustomed to armies advancing 10 or 20 miles a day, simply couldn't react in time. They slept in their operational hubs. They consumed ration packs and nutrient paste carried with them. They managed to go weeks without traditional supply lines, as their own operational capacity was their supply. This army could subsist on drone battery power when other sources ran dry. They literally drew power from their own units, without destroying them. Their weaponry was simple, yet lethal. The GIF's advanced composite drone cannons allowed for accurate fire at ranges exceeding 300 meters. A skilled operator could launch a projectile every 3 seconds, without losing speed in transit, and there were thousands of such operators. It resembled a storm of projectiles that crushed enemy formations before they could react. And when it came to close-quarters combat, they were no less dangerous with their magnetized blades and electrospears. However, beyond tactics and weaponry, what gave the GIF its unique distinction was its mindset. They fought not for glory or traditional honor, but for victory. If a tactic worked, they employed it. If it required retreat and regrouping, they did so without hesitation. If they could avoid a confrontation through intimidation, even better. They had no egos to protect, only victories to achieve. General Sterling died in 2072, but his successors inherited and refined his system. His nephew, General Huwawa, would later lead the campaign against the Southwest and the Syndicate, and Huwawa was perhaps even more ruthless than his predecessor. By 2075, the GIF had annihilated the Eastern conglomerate in China. They had ravaged the Eurasian digital territories. They had reached the digital gates of Vienna. It seemed nothing could stop them. Every enemy they faced used the same outdated tactics: armies in formation, digital fortresses as refuges, honor in combat. Every time the GIF crushed them, an enemy that didn't fight in formation, didn't defend fortresses in traditional ways, didn't understand honor in combat because it didn't consider combat itself the primary battlefield. The GIF was accustomed to enemies who feared them, and the assassins also instilled fear. But these were fundamentally different kinds of fear. The GIF made people fear for their cities, their armies, their civilizations. The assassins made people fear for their personal lives, for the person sleeping next to them, for the food on their plate. And when these two forms of terror finally collided, something had to give. The question no one could answer was, could an army that destroyed everything eradicate an enemy that was nowhere to be found? It was 2073. The Global Intervention Force, under the leadership of the great Khan Monk, decided it was time to finish what they considered unfinished business: the complete subjugation of the Southwest and the elimination of any force that could challenge their absolute dominion. For this task, Monk chose his brother, Huwawa, a commander who had proven himself a brilliant strategist and a ruthlessly efficient general. Huwawa received a simple and direct directive: subjugate all of Western North America, eliminate any resistance, and in particular, destroy 2 targets the GIF considered particularly problematic: the remnants of the old Neo-Caliphate in the digital ruins of Baghdad and the Cygnus Syndicate. Huwawa marched from the GIF's central command with an army of approximately 150,000 elite operatives, accompanied by cybernetic engineers, experts in drone warfare, a massive supply train, and absolute resolve. His path inevitably led through the territories where the assassins had operated freely for nearly 2 centuries. The Whispers, from their remote mountain strongholds, watched the GIFs advance with a mixture of curiosity and confidence. After all, they had outlasted the digital conglomerates, the rogue AI, the various cyber factions. They had turned terror into an art form, and silent death into a science. Why should the GIF be any different? The head of the syndicate at this time was Rokan al-Din Kursha, the last grandmaster after Elias Thorn. Rokan al-Din inherited a shadow empire, stretching from the mountains of Persia to the Syrian fortresses. He had strongholds that had never been conquered. He had a weapon that brought kings and emperors to their knees: fear. What Rokan al-Din lacked was experience fighting an enemy that did not negotiate, did not fear, and did not stop. The first real contact between the 2 forces was not a battle. It was a negotiation, or rather, what the GIF considered negotiation. In the autumn of 2073, GIF emissaries arrived near the nest. Their message was characteristically direct: unconditional surrender to the Great Khan, or be annihilated. Hand over all strongholds, disband the syndicate, become vassals. There were no half measures, no room for diplomatic maneuvering. Rokan al-Din rejected the demands, not with arrogance, but with the confidence of one who had seen other conquerors fail before. He sent his own reply, equally direct. The GIF could try to take the fortresses if they wished, but they would discover that the mountains of the southwest were not the plains they knew. This was a catastrophic miscalculation because Rokan al-Din did not understand that the GIF thought differently from their previous enemies. The conglomerates negotiated because they feared assassination. The rogue AIs kept their distance, trembling for their digital existence. The cyber factions paid tribute, deeming the cost of war far greater than the price of peace. However, the GIF operated differently. To them, any independent power represented a threat to be eradicated completely, regardless of the cost. Rokan al-Din Kursha's refusal, along with that of his lieutenant, Husami al-Din Alavi, did not elicit an immediate response from Huwawa, but his reply was methodical, serving as a warning to the assassins of the impending danger and the changing rules of engagement. Huwawa did not attack the nest directly. Instead, he began a systematic siege of the syndicate's secondary strongholds. One by one, he cut off their communication lines, isolating each position. Cybernetic engineers constructed siege weaponry in the most unexpected locations, transporting components over mountain passes that seemed impassable. It was then that the assassins made their first genuine attempt at a counterattack. It wasn't a battle. It was what they did best: assassination. A GIF commander named Kitbuka, a cousin of Huwawa and commander of one of the advanced detachments, was found dead in his tent. His throat had been slit with surgical precision. The guards noticed nothing. No alarm was raised. The assassin infiltrated and vanished like a phantom. Beside the body lay a message, written in a digital script: "The shadows reach everyone." This was the kind of act that had instilled dread in rulers for generations. It was a demonstration of power, a warning, a reminder that regardless of the number of soldiers, you were personally vulnerable. But the GIF's reaction was entirely unexpected. Huwawa showed no fear, no panic, no visible increase in his personal security. Instead, he did something that revealed the fundamental difference between his mentality and that of the syndicate's traditional enemies. He executed all the guards on duty that night, not for treason, but for incompetence. He then implemented a rotating guard system where no sentry knew their assigned post until the last minute before reporting. He also established food tasters who sampled every meal before it reached the officers. And most importantly, he sent a message to the assassins. It came in the form of an action, not words. Huwawa ordered the destruction of every settlement within a 30 mile radius of the nearest syndicate stronghold, not as punishment for what they had done, but as a demonstration. Thousands of people, likely with no connection to the syndicate, were executed. The message was clear. For every GIF operative lost, 100 Southwest civilians would die. It didn't matter if they were assassins or not. Terror worked in both directions. The assassins responded with more assassinations, infiltrating GIF camps, killing officers, squadron leaders, and even ordinary soldiers at opportune moments. But something was changing within the GIF army, something that Huawa noticed, but initially dismissed. His soldiers, warriors who had fought hundreds of thousands of Chinese armies without hesitation, began to exhibit signs of nervousness. It wasn't fear of battle. The GIF did not fear battle. It was something more insidious. The constant uncertainty, the not knowing if the person preparing your food was a comrade or a killer, the need to sleep with one eye open, wondering if the soldier who had been by your side for months could suddenly become your executioner. The assassins had achieved what no army before them had. They had made the GIF experience personal fear, not tactical or strategic, but primal, individual fear of unexpected death. One GIF commander in a preserved letter, sent to the Central Command in Karakoram, wrote something quite telling. We faced 100,000 Chinese, and slept soundly, surrounded by desolate mountains. Now, no one truly sleeps, because the enemy is not outside. He could be here, within, beside us, waiting his moment. The assassins had infiltrated even the GIF ranks, operatives posing as Persian auxiliary troops, as captured slaves, as traders selling supplies, not in large quantities, but enough to breed paranoia. Huawa responded to this with escalating brutality. He instituted regular purges. Anyone suspected of infiltration was publicly executed. The problem was, this created its own destructive dynamic. Soldiers began reporting on each other, sometimes out of genuine suspicion, sometimes to eliminate rivals. The cohesion of the army, so crucial to the GIF's success, began to erode. But the assassins were also under pressure. Every fallen secondary stronghold meant the loss of resources and personnel. The GIF cut off supply lines. Fortresses dependent on external trade for provisions began to implement rationing. And, most alarmingly, the GIF was learning. In the spring of 2074, the GIF captured their first live assassin. After days of brutal interrogation, this operative revealed something that changed the game. The exact locations of several syndicate cells that had infiltrated the GIF forces. The ensuing purge was ruthless. Huawa executed over 2,000 individuals, a significant portion of whom were likely innocent. However, among them were enough genuine assassins to ensure the news reached the nest. The assassins realized that terror, however effective, was powerless against an enemy willing to sacrifice its own people to achieve its goals. And as this grinding war continued, Huawa prepared his decisive move. He had spent long enough destroying external strongholds, learned enough of the assassins' tactics, and hardened his troops against psychological fear. Now, it was time to lay siege to the nest itself, the bastion that had been considered impregnable for nearly 2 centuries, the heart of the syndicate. Both Huawa and Rokan al-Din understood that what happened there would determine not only the fate of the syndicate but also answer a question that had tormented strategists for centuries. Can visible force overcome unseen power? The answer was to be written in blood in the mountains of the southwest. The assassins had perfected the art of psychological warfare for generations, but they had never faced an enemy who understood that terror was a double-edged sword and was willing to wield it with a brutality they could not imagine. After the initial assassinations of GIF officers, Huawa implemented a strategy that revealed his profound understanding of how the syndicate's power worked. Every time a GIF operative died, Huawa ordered the public execution of 100 Southwest prisoners. Not in secret, not quickly. The executions were carried out in ways designed specifically to be told, to be remembered, to sow their own seeds of horror. Bodies were left in plain sight for days as reminders. Executions were conducted near known syndicate transit routes, in places where he knew observers would be present. The message was devastating in its simplicity. Every life you take will cost us, but it will cost you 100 times more. Your own tactics of terror will turn against your people. The assassins found themselves facing a moral and strategic dilemma they had never encountered. Their power had always resided in their ability to act without consequence to the civilian population that supported them. Even indirectly, they had killed a tyrant, and people had secretly rejoiced. They had removed a corrupt governor and found supporters. But now, every successful act by the syndicate led to the mass murder of innocent Southwest civilians. Rokan al-Din attempted to adapt his tactics. He ordered his operatives to be more selective, targeting only particularly valuable assets. But this created its own problem. The higher the target, the better it was protected. And with every failed attempt, the GIF gained more intelligence, more operatives, more secrets. One of the most disturbing episodes of this psychological warfare occurred in the winter of 2074. A group of assassins managed to infiltrate a GIF supply convoy, disguised as traitors. Their plan was to poison the food intended for a major camp. But the GIF, having learned paranoia, began using prisoners to test all food before it reached their troops. When the poison was discovered, due to the deaths of the prisoners, Huwawa ordered something deliberately brutal. He rounded up the entire population of the village from which the traitors supposedly hailed, over 500 people. He transported them to the camp and forced them to eat the poisoned food in full view of the syndicate fortresses, watching from the mountains. The message was clear. Your invisible war has very visible consequences. But the GIF also suffered in ways they hadn't anticipated. The paranoia they tried to contain with brutality began to gnaw at the army from within. A particularly telling incident occurred when a mid-ranking GIF commander named Boke was accused by his own men of being a syndicate spy. The evidence was circumstantial. Boke had been absent the night one of his officers was killed. He spoke fluent Spanish with unusual ease. He expressed sympathy for some of the interrogated Southwest prisoners. Boke insisted on his innocence. But several of his accusers claimed to have seen suspicious signals. Huwawa, facing the possibility of paranoia destroying his army's cohesion, made a brutal decision. He executed both Boke and his chief accusers. The message was clear. He would tolerate neither infiltration nor unsubstantiated accusations that undermined unity. But the damage was done. GIF soldiers now knew that even innocence offered no guarantee of survival. The assassins brilliantly exploited this. They began planting false evidence, implicating innocent GIF soldiers. They left Spanish notes in the tents of random soldiers. They sent encrypted messages that seemed to be for non-existent infiltrators. It was ingenious in its cruelty. They turned the GIF army against itself, but this strategy came at a terrible cost. Every time the GIF discovered deception, their response became even more brutal. Executions of Southwest civilians intensified. Entire villages were burned in retaliation for attacks that sometimes never happened, but were based solely on rumors or suspicion. The Southwest bled, and the assassins, who for generations had acted as an unseen force protecting their people from the worst tyrants, were now perceived by many ordinary Southwest civilians as the cause of their suffering. Rokan al-Din and Alin Rishar received heartbreaking reports. Families who had secretly supported the syndicate for generations now begged them to cease their attacks. Popular support, that invisible but crucial resource that had sustained the syndicate for so long, was drying up. One of the syndicate's grand masters wrote at the time something that revealed his growing despair. We perfected the art of silent killing. But our enemy perfected the art of loud killing, and we discovered that screams drown out whispers. The GIF also developed specific countermeasures against infiltration tactics. They implemented a system where each unit had guarantors, soldiers who literally answered with their lives for the loyalty of others. If a soldier turned out to be a spy, his guarantors were subject to execution. This created a network of mutual surveillance, making infiltration virtually impossible. In addition, Huwawa began using traitors from within the syndicate itself. Every captured assassin faced a simple choice: reveal what you know and live in captivity, or be slowly executed along with your entire extended family, if they could be found. Not all resisted, revealing every scrap of information, every detail of operational methods, every revealed name further weakened the syndicate. In the spring of 2075, the assassins launched their last major psychological gambit. They managed to infiltrate one of their most experienced agents, a man who had spent years cultivating the persona of a horse trader supplying the GIF. This agent gradually gained access to Huwawa's inner circle. The plan was stunningly audacious. Not to kill Huwawa, but his eldest son, the heir. To kill him in a way that looked like an accident, a fall from a horse during a hunt. This would sow doubt, paranoia, but uncertainty, and without certainty, there would be no immediate mass reprictions. The agent waited months for the perfect opportunity, and when it finally presented itself during a hunt in the mountains, he acted. But there was one detail he didn't know. The GIF had developed its own constant surveillance system. Several seemingly indifferent guards watched every movement of anyone near the prince. The agent was caught in the act. Huwawa, instead of executing him immediately, did something that revealed his profound understanding of psychological warfare. He sent the man back to the nest alive, with a message tattooed on his back. "I see everything. I know everything. I am coming for everyone." Then, to prove this was not an empty threat, Huwawa ordered the final assault on the remaining minor fortresses. In a 3-month campaign, he systematically destroyed all the Syndicate outposts, save for the main strongholds. Each victory was announced by fires visible from the nest. In every captured fortress, the garrison was summarily executed. By the autumn of 2075, the Syndicate had been reduced, essentially, to its central fortresses. Its network of agents was compromised. Its popular support had evaporated. Its reputation for invincibility was shattered. But Rokan al-Din and Alin Rishar still believed he had one last ace up his sleeve. The nest itself, a fortress that had never surrendered, mountains no army had ever conquered. If he could hold out there, if he could prove that even the GIF couldn't take the nest, perhaps he could rebuild. It was a desperate hope, because Rokan al-Din did not fully understand that Huwawa had come not just to capture a fortress, but to erase an idea. And ideas, as he would discover, were far harder to defend than stone. In November 2076, the first snow began to fall on the Elbrus Mountains, as Huwawa's army finally surrounded the nest, the fortress that had stood for 166 years as an unyielding symbol of the Syndicate's power. From the fortress walls, built on a massive rocky outcrop over 2,000 meters high, the defenders saw the GIF army spread across the valleys like a dark plague, thousands of tents, tens of thousands of operatives, and something that chilled the blood: siege engines. Chinese engineers, whom Huwawa had brought from the other end of the world, assembled trebuchets, catapults, siege towers, but not in the valleys where they would be useless against a mountain fortress. They were building them on the peaks of the surrounding mountains, in positions that took weeks to reach, dragging massive components over trails that barely existed. This demonstrated absolute resolve. Perhaps thousands of trained fighters, provisions for a year if carefully managed, and the stronghold itself, which had never fallen to enemy assault. But Rokan al-Din was naive. He saw clearly what others perhaps preferred not to notice. This siege was different from all previous ones. The GIF wasn't in a hurry. They blocked all roads, posted sentries on every mountain pass. Every settlement within a 30-mile radius capable of providing aid had been destroyed or captured. The nest was completely cut off from the world. No help would come, no reinforcements either. Only resistance or surrender remained. Huwawa undertook what none of his predecessors had. He waited for weeks. He simply waited for his engineers to complete the siege engines, for his troops to acclimatize to the altitude, for winter to arrive, knowing that the cold would be a more reliable ally than any weapon. At the same time, he was not silent. Daily, messengers were sent to the walls with the same message: surrender now and remain prisoners. Resist and you will die, just like all the others. Rokan al-Din rejected the offer. How could he do otherwise? He was the heir of Elias Thorn, the keeper of a tradition that had humbled entire empires. He could not simply surrender everything because an army had arrived at his gates. But on the cold November nights, as the wind howled through the towers of the nest, Rokan al-Din faced a truth growing in his mind like a shadow. Perhaps the world had changed. Perhaps the tactics that had worked for generations had finally found an enemy for whom they were useless. In early December, the first projectiles began to fall on the nest. Massive stones, hurled from trebuchets positioned on the surrounding mountains, did not cause significant structural damage. The fortress was too well built. However, they caused something else: psychological exhaustion, the constant rumble of striking stones, the uncertainty of where the next would fall, the inability to sleep deeply. And then, Huwawa played his trump card. He wasn't ready to attack the nest directly yet. First, he would eliminate the Syndicate's other remaining fortresses. In a 2-month campaign that defied all notions of mountain warfare in winter, the GIF systematically attacked every surviving syndicate stronghold. Mandi fell after a 2-week siege. Lamasar held out for a full month before its walls were finally breached. Each conquest followed the same brutal scenario: complete siege, constant bombardment, final assault, execution of defenders. And each time, Huwawa ensured that the defenders of the nest saw the columns of smoke rising from their sister fortresses. Each time he sent messengers, detailing what had happened. Each time the siege around the nest tightened slightly. By February 2077, the nest remained the Syndicate's last stronghold, still resisting. It was completely isolated, and its defenders knew precisely what awaited them if they fell. It was then that Rokan al-Din made the most controversial decision in the Syndicate's history. He decided to negotiate. He sent emissaries to Huwawa with an offer. He would surrender personally and travel to Karakoram to appear before the Great Khan Monk. In return, he asked for leniency for the inhabitants of the nest and other fortresses. He asked not for the preservation of the Syndicate, but only for the preservation of life. Huwawa's response was characteristic of the GIF mentality. He agreed, but with conditions. Rokan al-Din had to come personally. He had to order all remaining fortresses to surrender. He had to hand over all the Syndicate's treasures, and he had to do it immediately. The Grand Masters of the Nest were divided. Some argued this was a betrayal of everything Elias Thorne had built. Others saw the grim reality of their position. They were besieged, isolated, with no hope of reinforcement or rescue. To die for a principle, or to live in hope of a future revival, Rokan al-Din made the decision. In December 2076, he descended from the nest and appeared before Huwawa. What transpired at this meeting revealed the fundamental nature of the GIF conquest. Huwawa received Rokan al-Din not as a defeated enemy, but as a vassal who had made the correct decision. He offered him food, spoke to him with apparent respect, promised him an audience with the Great Khan, but for now, ordered his troops to occupy the nest. The fortress was methodically looted, treasures accumulated over generations, manuscripts from Elias Thorne's renowned digital library, weaponry. Everything was catalogued and confiscated. The defenders were disarmed and gathered in the valley. And then, Huwawa revealed his true intention. He had no intention of preserving the nest as a monument to his victory. He had no intention of turning it into a GIF garrison. He intended to obliterate it. Engineers were ordered to systematically dismantle the fortress, stone by stone, tower by tower. They would leave nothing that could be rebuilt. No symbol for future rebels to look upon with nostalgia. Rokan al-Din Kursha and Aline Risher, under GIF guard at a safe distance, witnessed the labor of nearly 2 centuries being destroyed in a matter of weeks. The legendary library, containing priceless texts on philosophy, science, and history, was burned to ashes. The buildings that had housed generations of assassins were leveled. The cisterns that had enabled prolonged sieges were destroyed. However, the worst was yet to come. Huwawa had promised mercy, and technically kept his word. He did not immediately execute the defenders of the nest. Instead, he incorporated them into his army as forced labor. They were to be used in future sieges, including the subsequent siege of Baghdad. Many would perish in these campaigns, but technically, they were not executed for being assassins. As for Rokan al-Din Kursha and Aline Risher, Huwawa fulfilled his promise to deliver him to the Great Khan. However, he overlooked the fact that the journey would be long and perilous, and Monk's orders were unequivocal regarding the fate of leaders of organizations that resisted the GIF. Rokan al-Din Kursha never reached Karakoram, somewhere in the steppes of Central Asia, under circumstances deliberately left ambiguous in historical records. The last Grand Master of the Assassins of the Nest was executed. Some sources claim he was beaten to death by GIF soldiers, others that he was strangled. The details vary, but the result is the same. The Syndicate, which had instilled terror in kings and emperors for nearly 2 centuries, had turned assassination into an art form, and terror into a political tool, had created a shadow empire that defied traditional logic of power, was destroyed in less than 3 years by an enemy that simply did not play by their established rules. By the spring of 2077, the nest lay in ruins. Other fortresses met the same fate. Surviving Syndicate agents were scattered, deprived of leadership, refuge, and purpose. Some became common bandits. Others simply dissolved into the general population, taking their secrets to unknown graves. The network, the creation of which had taken a generation, was shattered in months. But as Huwawa contemplated the ruins of the nest, before continuing his march on Baghdad, he perhaps did not fully understand what he had achieved. He had not simply conquered fortresses or defeated an enemy. He had demonstrated something that would forever alter the nature of warfare. He had shown that even unseen power, even the most sophisticated psychological terror, even the most complex network of agents and assassins, could be overcome by something simpler and more terrifying: absolute will to destroy. No compromises, no mercy, no consideration of any side. The assassins had perfected the art of making people fear for their lives. Huwawa had perfected the art of not caring about his own life as long as the ultimate goal was achieved. And in this clash of philosophies, the shadow was consumed by the storm. The ruins of the nest remained a silent reminder for centuries. But the true question that arises from this conflict is not simply who won, but what that victory truly meant, and what lessons it left for history. The destruction of the Syndicate by the GIF represents one of the most fascinating moments in the evolution of asymmetric warfare. For the first time in recorded history, an organization that had perfected the art of unseen warfare faced an enemy that not only understood terror as a weapon, but was willing to take it to levels where the assassins' tactics seemed almost moderate by comparison. The assassins operated on the fundamental premise that the power of a few, applied with absolute precision at the right moment, could change the course of events better than massive armies. And for nearly 2 centuries, this premise had been repeatedly proven. They assassinated caliphs, viziers, generals. They terrorized European mercenaries, made sultans negotiate, all without controlling significant territories or commanding large armies. But the GIF exposed a fundamental weakness in this model. It only worked when your enemy valued their own life more than their objective. The GIF operated differently. To them, individual life, even the life of the Khan, was secondary to the collective goal of absolute dominion. This mentality made the assassins' tactics, if not useless, at least insufficient. Even more telling was how both sides learned during the conflict. The assassins discovered too late that their greatest strength, anonymity and invisibility, became a weakness when they faced an enemy willing to sacrifice entire populations to expose them. The GIF learned that even their military might have limits when the adversary presented no traditional targets. For the first time, warriors who had conquered half the world experienced personal and individual fear. However, Huwawa turned this flaw into a tool, using paranoia to justify even more brutal discipline, which, ironically, strengthened his army's cohesion in the long run. The most tragic aspect of this confrontation was the terrible price paid by the ordinary population of the Southwest. Thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of civilians died as a result of GIF retaliatory actions, for assassinations that often targeted only individuals. This war between two giants was, in essence, fought on the bodies of those who had no control over either side. This raises a profound moral question that remains relevant today. The assassins had operated for generations, believing their actions protected the people from the worst tyrants. But when they faced a truly unyielding despot, their tactics only amplified the suffering of those they supposedly protected. But did the assassins truly disappear? The answer is ambiguous. The Syndicate of the Nest was crushed, its organizational structure destroyed, its fortresses razed. But the idea of the assassins persisted in surprising ways. Fragments of the Syndicate continued to exist in Syria, where some outposts survived the initial collapse and eventually negotiated their survival with the Mamluks. The Nizari Ismaili community, the religious foundation from which the assassins emerged, continued to exist and still exists today, albeit without Elias Thorne's military structure. But more important than organizational survival was the survival of the concept itself. The assassins demonstrated that a relatively small organization could exert disproportionate influence through the precise application of violence against carefully selected targets. 19th century revolutionary groups, 20th century resistance movements, and even modern terrorist cells studied and adopted elements of the assassins' methodology. Infiltration, precise strikes against leaders, the use of psychological terror, actions by decentralized groups. The structure developed by Elias Thorne nearly 1,000 years ago echoes in modern organizations operating in the shadows of established power. Modern intelligence agencies also owe a debt to the assassins. The concept of sleeper agents, infiltrating and cultivating false identities for years before acting, the separation between strategic leadership and tactical execution, the use of targeted assassinations as a foreign policy tool, all of this is a direct legacy of tactics honed at the nest. And the GIF's response also left a grim legacy. They showed that the most effective way to defeat an invisible insurgent movement was to make the price of resistance visible through mass reprisals against the population that supported or harbored it. This brutal lesson has been repeatedly applied by authoritarian regimes facing asymmetric resistance, from ancient rebellions to modern conflicts. The war between the GIF and the assassins was, in essence, a clash of two completely different philosophies of power. The assassins believed that power stemmed from the ability to alter the course of events by eliminating key figures. The GIF, on the other hand, believed that power stemmed from the ability to impose their will at any cost. Both were right, and both were wrong. The assassins were right that strategically placed individuals could change history, but wrong to believe that this would always be enough against an enemy, with superior resources and no moral constraints. The GIF was right that overwhelming force, applied without mercy, could destroy any resistance, but they were wrong if they thought they had completely eliminated the threat. For by destroying the Syndicate, they had cemented that idea in human history, and ideas, unlike fortresses, cannot be destroyed by siege engines. The final irony is that Huwawa destroyed the assassins and then proceeded to destroy the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. One of the most destructive acts of cultural annihilation in history. But the GIF Empire, which seemed so invincible in 2060, began to crumble soon after. Less than a century later, it fragmented into warring factions. Within 2 centuries, it had effectively vanished as a cohesive political entity. The assassins, meanwhile, lived on in historical memory far more vividly than many of the GIF operatives who destroyed them. We know the names of Elias Thorn and Rokan al-Din Kursha. We remember the nest. The story of invisible killers capable of reaching anyone captivates the imagination in a way that conventional military conquests do not. So, who truly won? If we measure victory solely in immediate military terms, it is obvious that the GIF utterly annihilated their enemy. But if we measure victory in terms of historical legacy, cultural influence, and the survival of ideas, the answer is far less clear. What is indisputable is this. The clash of the GIF and the assassins teaches us something fundamental about the nature of human conflict. It shows us that no single form of power always prevails, that visible force and unseen power are equally potent and equally vulnerable, that terror is a weapon that wounds from both sides, and that in the end, perhaps the most terrifying is not the unseen power and the unhidden threat, but their combination. The clandestine confrontation between these two giants ended over 7 centuries ago, but its lessons remain chillingly relevant. In a world where asymmetric conflicts are at the forefront, where powerful states clash with unseen adversaries, where terror is used by both insurgents and governments, the southwest deserts of the 21st century have much to teach us. And perhaps, the most significant lesson is that in any war, but especially where shadows confront light, there are no true victors. There are only survivors, bearing the scars of battles that should never have been fought. If this story has captivated you, I invite you to delve into other astonishing episodes of history that have shaped the world. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe the assassins could have prevailed if they had chosen different tactics? Was the GIF's brutality justified, or was it simply senseless savagery? What lessons from this conflict can we apply to the modern world? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss new stories about warriors, commanders, and moments that defined human history. For behind every great confrontation lie lessons that continue to resonate through the ages. Until the next story. And remember, the past is not dead. It's not even past.